Alright, let's dive into something that's been buzzing in the news lately, and it's got me thinking about the bigger picture. So, here's the deal: Australian households are spending more, and what's driving this? Electric vehicles and travel. Sounds straightforward, right? But personally, I think there's a lot more going on here than meets the eye. Let's break it down. First off, the Australian Bureau of Statistics, ABS, dropped some data showing a 0.8% month-on-month increase in household spending in June. Now, what's really interesting is where this money is going. Transport spending jumped by 3%, and a huge chunk of that is thanks to electric vehicle sales. Here's the kicker: nearly half of the vehicles sold in April, May, and June were either electric or hybrid. If you take a step back and think about it, this isn't just a trend, it's a shift in how people are responding to rising fuel prices. What this really suggests is that Aussies are not just buying EVs because they're trendy, they're making a practical, long-term financial decision. And that's fascinating because it shows how economic pressures can accelerate behavioral changes. Now, let's talk about travel. Air travel spending is back to pre-war levels after a 4.4% dip in April. What many people don't realize is that this recovery isn't just about people wanting to take vacations again. It's also tied to global events, like the Iran war, which disrupted travel earlier this year. From my perspective, this highlights how interconnected our world is. A conflict halfway across the globe can directly impact your local economy. And that's a detail I find fascinating because it reminds us that economic trends are rarely isolated. But here's where it gets even more intriguing. While transport spending is booming, other categories are seeing more muted growth. Household spending excluding transport only rose by 0.3%, and some categories even recorded declines. Recreation and culture saw a 1.4% rise, driven by things like electronic goods, live entertainment, and gambling. One thing that immediately stands out is the role of major sporting events in boosting this spending. But what's really interesting is that some of this spending is for future events. People are buying tickets now for performances later. This raises a deeper question: are Aussies spending more because they're optimistic about the future, or are they trying to lock in experiences before economic conditions worsen? Now, let's zoom out to the bigger picture. Despite this overall increase in spending, the Commonwealth Bank of Australia expects it to soften by the end of the year, especially with housing prices declining. Personally, I think this is where things get really complex. On one hand, you've got solid financial buffers that could keep spending strong. On the other hand, there's the looming threat of tighter monetary policy if inflation doesn't cool down. The Reserve Bank of Australia, RBA, has already raised interest rates 3 times this year to 4.35%, and they're not ruling out further hikes. But here's the twist: economists like Abhijit Surya from Capital Economics believe the RBA might be done tightening. Why? Because the link between household spending data and national consumption isn't always clear-cut. Plus, with fuel excise cuts expiring, automotive fuel inflation is set to rise, which could complicate things further. So, what does this all mean? In my opinion, it's a delicate balance. Aussies are adapting to economic pressures by shifting their spending habits, but the long-term impact on the economy is still up in the air. What makes this really interesting is that it's not just about numbers, it's about people's behaviors, their expectations, and how they're navigating an uncertain world. If you ask me, this story isn't just about electric vehicles or travel, it's about resilience, adaptation, and the intricate dance between individual choices and macroeconomic policies. And here's my closing thought: as we watch these trends unfold, it's worth asking ourselves, are we seeing the beginning of a new normal, or is this just a temporary blip? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Because, honestly, this is one of those moments where the data is just the starting point. The real story is in how we interpret it and what it means for the future.